Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 203 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. All right, there's a frame. I'm working on her face, okay? Right now, made the joke that she looks pretty blocky right now, okay? And this isn't necessarily, this is different because I'm pointing it, okay? When you lay out a face, when you carve it, different people have a different approach. Some people will take and cut a real deep scoop, just take a round chisel and just cut a big old scoop up here and up here. And they'll go all the way up, basically up until you get to this point here, up to their brow. They go right up and cut that out. And then you can place the eyes outboard of the nostrils so that the eyes are out. And you'll see a lot of very classical jobs done, and the eyes are very wide like that. If you get into how eyes are actually on people that are alive, they usually aren't spread out quite that far. If you start measuring, you'll get the corner of the mouth that go up more into the center of the eye, the edge of the nostril may go up to the edge of the eye, but you'll have material from the corner of your eye. You may still have material there, and once you start digging, you can dig out a lot of that material and you surrender volume. Okay, goes back to what I say I don't like to do. Her brow is up here, and remember this side I wasn't as happy. I wanted to raise this side a little bit, so I'm going to leave this a little heavy, a little vague for right now. You can shoot a point where you want it to be height-wise, and then cheat and go up. If you want to raise it an eighth of an inch or a quarter inch, just go up an eighth of an inch and do it. You have to be careful though, you don't need that additional volume to bring the detail up there. Right now, her eyes are extremely heavy underneath here because this is her brow and this is the end of her nose, and so there's a lot of material here that's got to go off. As I said, some people will take a half round chisel, just a round chisel, and they'll just plow it and dig two big things on each side of the nose. That's not normally how I do it. I do it to a certain extent, but that's not the way I lay it out. If you do that, you have to be careful not to dig the corner of the eye, where the tear duct is, too deep. If you want to have a little bit of area, because there's some tissue structures there that look better. I think they look more realistic if they're there. Other people will block it in as planes. They'll have these flat facets where they have a transition, and then they'll go and carve the detail around that. Some will cut the eyes and they will cut them, they'll go up and then they'll come out at like a 60-degree angle so that this is all beveled from this cheekbone up to almost to the top of the brow, to your upper eyelid. And that can work too. It depends on how the eyes are shaped. A lot of our eyes, when we carve them in the genre stuff, the eyes will be largely closed. And that's to make them look peaceful, because when the eyes are open, you got to be very careful. They look very stark. They can have a very bad expression on your face that isn't a pleasing, calming expression. And when you start trying to structure a pupil and an iris, and if you carve and incise little lines, it starts looking amateurish, so it's better to not do that. If you create a dark spot in the middle, that's great. That's easier with a bigger eye versus a small eye. And there's this, I'm hoping that you're understanding from what I'm saying, there's a lot of ways to do this. And I'm not going to necessarily say that one is better or one is worse. usually one method will be more suitable for what you're working on. You may have to change it up. I want to leave good volume for her eyes. What the mistake that I see most often is people will carve the upper eyelid and they'll define this area with a very sharp line. And what that does is that ages the figure tremendously. When you don't have some fatty deposits in this upper eyelid, the person looks emaciated or they look very old. And when you can have a chiseled line in here that's much like drapery, you're usually going to end up with a funky looking figure. Okay, you're better off to not have that. And so I would rather reduce this material down at the end after I'm done with it and really have lots of volume here to play with to make an eye that's very full and very fleshy. Just like I want her hand to be very fleshy. Her hand is still big. I can still shrink it, but it's nice and plump. It's got great volume and it really stands out in person. I'm not sure on the video how much it stands out for what y'all are seeing, but in person, this looks completely different than the whole rest of the job. Okay, and so I want her head to be like that. But what I'm going to do, I want to work on pointing, and I'm going to just work on developing more of this side of her face because I'm pretty happy with it. And then I'm going to adjust the other side to it. I'm also going to do some more work on her neck to try to get her neck where I want it to be. And I did talk about the differences with the foreshortening and everything and how we carve flush to the face plane on a bas relief. That foreshortening, usually the neck is going to be tipped forward. It's going to be tipped because you want to have the expression like they're leaning out and they're praying over you. This is more in repose, so her neck is not going to be as angled forward. It's going to be more vertical, almost pulled back a little bit to where she's got her head pulled back. And you'll have the larynx, your windpipe, or your trachea, I guess it is, whatever. The windpipe will angle forward to the back of your tongue, but the rest of your neck will slope towards your sternum. And so try to make that all work. But I did tape my finger. I got cut working in the kitchen. You know, I couldn't tell you how many years it's been. It's like I just got nicked on the edge of a knife trimming some broccoli. I've never found a Band-Aid that'll stay on doing this work because the dust just saturates it, the adhesive all sticks to it, and it's just junk. So we just make a bandage out of white tape and turn a piece back on it to tape over it and tape it up as tight as we can tape it. And I'll keep the tape while I'm working and let it tropically dry out overnight and try to tape it up for a few days, but it's going to be a bugger. I have to be really careful because this is right in the danger zone of carving. If it starts leaking and bleeding a lot, it can be really bad. Okay, just got to deal with it. So that's the way it is. All right, I'm going to start carving. Okay, as I'm pointing this area here, I'm trying to maintain strength, all right, because we cut away some stone here underneath. I don't want this to be, because this is going to be like an inch deep, but I've got to cut this hole. I don't want to have this big piece out here with an inch deep, so if I stress it, it pops off, okay? I want to walk this back, and I'm doing it on a bevel, just like we do all these other things to create that edge. I'm beveling this back so that this will be stronger, so in case my drill binds a little bit, it shouldn't, but sometimes they do, or when I'm carving it, when I'm using an actual chisel and I'm working, it doesn't find a loose spot here where the stress could go away. I want to have this reduced so that this is stronger as I work this material off this corner, okay? Hope that makes sense. I'm using a 16 point, so I'm going slow. It's not real aggressive. I could also use a 2-blade or a bush chisel, but this was handy. as you shoot this, this is, you know, sort of that visual noise thing. Her head looks really big, okay? And it is big. It's not a tiny head, but it should be scaled pretty close to what her head in real life would be. And when you start pointing this, these points here look like there's no room for her chin, okay? As she transitions from being completely on her own, you know, this head, once you put this into this larger stone, this larger mass, optically it looks a lot different. And when you start shooting your points, you'll start understanding where things really are and where they're not. Now, this last point that I shot, it's fairly far down on her chin. It looks like there's just no room. It's right down at the bottom. It looks like I've taken off way too much underneath here to her neck. So I've transitioned from, roughly from here to the transition to the turn where it starts to go underneath. So I've got this point that'll be right beside it. And just going on this, I've got to go an inch deep. And you're gonna second guess yourself a lot. You're gonna wonder if you've done too much, if you screwed it up. You're gonna check the model. You're gonna check your stone. You're gonna just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And as I work this here on her cheek, I'm going to start to reveal her in a way that really isn't clear right now. And it's going to look scary when you're taking off a lot of material like this. And if you're worried, just go slow and trust it. It will work, okay? When you're pointing, we've been pointing and kind of roughing it. I've been doing drapery, and if the points vary a little bit, it isn't as critical. You should be accurate, but it isn't as critical. You got a little more leeway when you're doing fabric, you're going to carve folds and everything. We were more accurate on our hand. But you need to understand what people are going to really look at, okay? And they probably aren't going to get hung up on anything as much as they will the face. They're going to look for a pretty face or a strong face. They're going to look for facial detail. And so if you've got a good model and you've got your point machine, this is where you've really got to work to be accurate. You've got to be accurate in terms of how you set the pointing machine when you're adjusting it. And you've got to be sure that if you're using, like the pointing machine, like I say, to open it and close it, or not pushing against the whole arm and flexing it. Even this, it's easy to push this in and cause this arm to flex a little bit. And you'll capture that, and you'll go just a little bit too deep if you cut right to the bottom of that, to a perfect fit. I don't like to, I like to make sure I stay up just a tiny bit when I'm doing, like I'm going to do skin, because if I've got a point that I shot down on her fabric, down on her shoulder here, and there's one little tiny point, that shot with a point, and there's a remnant of that on the final carving, it probably isn't going to jump out to where you see it. In general, you'll wipe them all off, but if you study a job really hard, once in a while you can find a remnant point that's left over that's just a little bit, and typically that's because the carver missed it. those remnant points on her face, they won't miss them. People are going to be studying her face. They're going to be looking at her face. And her face is probably going to be axed to a smoother surface than her skin, her skin in general, face and hand, whatever, than her fabric or the feathers or anything else. Because on those surfaces, you're going to be trying to denote texture of the fabric and movement of the detail, like with the fletching on the wings. But on her face, you want pretty skin. And so if you've got any little pock marks, it's going to look like, she's got acne or whatever. You don't want that. So be very careful when you're setting up your pouring machine to make sure that it's completely relaxed. It's clipped in. It's dedicated to where it's going to be. But when you push this, be careful with your measurement. Make sure on your how tight it is. If I'm not mistaken, this machine, Angelo took it apart during my apprenticeship because there were a couple of flat spots on the ball. And there will be flat spots that develop, and you have to go in there and blend them off because it will allow it to just bump. You'll bump it and it'll just move. And as long as it moves out, that's fine. As long as it doesn't compromise another detail, that's fine. But boy, if it moves and can move in because you bump it the wrong way, it can ruin a job. So I'm going real careful up the side of her cheek, up this line basically right here. I'm going to try to do that because that's on a transition. The rest of it will come over flat and the rest of it will go back. And so I'm trying to get pretty close to where that transition is and going in a straight line, a curve line up this curve, and then I could offset it for the next line and the next line and the next line and get a very accurate face put together. If you shoot your points on a marble job with your point, I don't even know where I set it now. Let's see this up. Take your point and you set it on a marble job. It's very easy if you use to carve in granite to create a little white stun right there, and it never goes away. The only way you can get away is to a braided way, and that could require removing an 1/8 of an inch of stone depending on how you hit it. So you got to really learn your medium and be careful with it. So Giuliano said, people that carve granite, they can't carve marble, they push through it and they break it, and there's a lot of truth in that. You got to really be careful. So her lines are coming good, and just going to keep working. You got to remember, some of the reason that her chin, you can barely see over here, looked like it was short, is that where her eyes appear to be are clear down here on this, on the stone. I haven't taken any of this off up here, so there's still a lot to come off up here. It's going to make her face look longer, and it's going to make her chin look like it's not as close to her eyes. All right? Back to carving. When you're, I set my tools down, and now I can't find them. When you're sharpening your tool, there's going to be some tools that are more expensive to use and maintain than others. A 9-point is fairly easy to sharpen, a 1/2 inch. 3/8 is fairly easy to sharpen. You have to dress your wheel a lot because there's small points, so you have to take your skinny 1/4 inch wheel if you've got carbide tools, and you have to dress it to a sharp edge, to a knife edge, more often with these because they're small. A 16-point is a whole different animal. These points are, I don't use this a lot on most jobs. These points are about the same size, the teeth, as a 3/8 9-point, but it's a lot bigger because it's got a whole extra row, a whole extra set of teeth on one side and then on another, so it's got 4x4 instead of 3x3, and that extra width is a really big deal on a wheel. If you've got an 8-inch grinder, if you've got a smaller grinder, you're using like a 6-inch grinder, you got 1/4 inch wide carbide, green wheels for sharpening these tools, it's going to go really fast. You could easily use up almost an entire wheel just to sharpen this one tool, okay? Because it's really hard to keep your centers straight. They drift off to one side when you're working it. You know, you're basically the wheel, and I'm putting this against the wheel. It's very easy to drift and have these lines go off center, and come out really crooked on the other side, or not match if you come in from both sides. I come in from both sides and try to work it to where I meet in the center. But they take a lot of time to sharpen. It's not a quick job. You know, you'll spend 4 times as long sharpening one of these as you will sharpening a 9-point. It just takes that much longer, and you'll use up a noticeable amount of the wheel and whatever you're dressing it with. If you got old saw blades, or go buy cheap bonded blades to dress your green wheels. If you don't have any worn out ones, we use the old ones that are worn out, that thermal or crack, and there's usually a little bit left. But if you don't have any, go buy a couple of cheap junk diamond blades that you'd never put on stone to dress your wheel. But these are a lot more challenging to do well. They work well for what they do. They don't take off a lot of stone, but they take it off very carefully. But, you know, just think about that when you're budgeting your equipment, because if you only buy 1 or 2 diamond wheel or green wheels at a time, you could wipe out a whole 1/4-inch wheel. You know, take at least a quarter of it, if not more, depending on how your dressing goes, sharpening one of these. This one, I had trouble when it first sharpened it, and I drifted enough that I just dressed it flat and started all over again, and then worked it in carefully. I got it pretty good. So I just wanted to bring that up because I don't think I've ever mentioned that. I don't use 16 points a lot, and they look like they've got great potential. They're good for certain things, but they're such an aggravation that I don't like to fool with them much. So, all right, back to the stone. I don't know how well this will show, but you can see I've got quite a few points shot under her eye, and this is still way heavy. There's a lot of material to come off here. So, because this is her brow, and that right under these points is where it cuts away for her upper eyelid. But you generally carve them with eyes closed until later on, and then you work to open the eyes. I wanted to show you something. If you can see how these points, you know, curve as they go around. Over here on the model, it's probably easier to see. I said you're supposed to take a point when you're perpendicular to the tangent, and that means that if it's a high point, if it's a curve, you're completely on top of that curve, like perpendicular to the tangent right here. Let me see if I can get a red pencil. If I come on to this point right here, that's perpendicular to the tangent. I don't want to come in like this. I don't want to come in like this. I want to come in straight on there. And so if I move over a little bit, like to this point, this is perpendicular to the tangent. And it's square on both sides. The reason that's critical, let me hang the camera up so it's not bouncing around this much. The big reason for being perpendicular to the tangent when you take these points is that you may understand how the model looks and how your pointing machine is installed and how it agrees with the model, how it relates, okay? But if this figure is rotated slightly in the stone, just say in the stone it's turned just a little bit, that completely changes potentially and when I say that, it's, you know, it shouldn't matter, you know, but until you understand that everything's right. If if this is rotated slightly in the stone and you don't understand that yet as you're carving it, and you're not perpendicular to the tangent when you take a point, then you go over here and you shoot it, you could dig away material remember that pencil? If that pencil, the way it was set up, I don't know, it won't quite show here. If we were on here and that pencil happened to be like this, and we shot in and we could erode material away, and you may think, oh, there's lots of room around here, it's not a problem. But until you really understand where this is in the stone, if you're perpendicular to the tangent, you're always safe, okay? And if you think this is faced one way and she's turned just a little bit in the stone because of how you put your foundation points on there versus what you have for a conceptualization of this stone and where she's going to be looking, you know, if you sink these points different, you know, like one of these foundation points is lower higher, it's going to turn her head on the job. And if you made that, if that happened, whether it's a mistake or whether it's intentional, if you're not perpendicular to the tangent, you'll ruin carvings. I mean, that's just a fact. You'll end up taking out material that you need, and then you got to shrink her head or turn her head or, you know, push the whole face up because you ate off some part of the nostril or whatever. So when you're perpendicular to the tangent, it's a matter of professionalism, but it's a matter of safety. Now, that said, there's going to be hard to reach places, like, just say for instance, I don't know how well this will show. Say I was going to try to shoot right here at her nostril. Let's see if we can make this work. And I was going to go in here and shoot right to the base of this nostril. Now, that show, yeah, there it goes, that kind of shows. Now, this is down in basically a 90-degree corner, okay? You could approach it from here, straight out, and approach it from here, straight out, and understand that you've got a wall that the needle has to go right tight against it, okay? And sometimes I'll do that, you know, when I shot this point up near her eye, you know, right over in here. This is just a clearance. This is way out in the open. There's nothing even close to it. But I kept it really tight to the needle so that I had as much volume as possible. If you dig this down, say because this is a 90 and you do a 40, you split it, it's where you go right to the center, and you're perpendicular to that tangent where that line is, you still could dig out part of that nostril and part of that upper mandible as you try to drill down in. So you've got to understand, sometimes you're going to have to cheat with that perpendicular to the tangent, but it's got to be a special situation, a special issue about clearance, where you're trying to make sure you don't like wipe off the edge of her nostril because you're drilling down there and all of a sudden there's an eighth or a quarter inch of her nostril that's been drilled away and it ain't coming back. So, but as you start getting into a pattern, let's move this over again. I want to go back and talk a little bit more. The next little segment went longer than what I want to put on this video because it's you know, like 8 minutes, almost 10 minutes, and I want to leave it intact. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. And then when we get to the next video, we'll just star it up, you know, going on, pointing on her face. I keep going back to saying you got to trust the process. You got to look past the wreckage, and you got to trust yourself and not the stone. The stone's not going to guide you on how to do it. And it's, you know, you'll hear people actually say, I was waiting for the stone to tell me what to do. You know, there's times when I'm hitting the stone really hard, you know, like with a big hammer breaking it, and you listen to that stone to hear what it's going to do, because if you hit it hard and it doesn't let go, and you hit it 2 or 3 more times and it doesn't let go, you're going to keep going until something really breaks. That's a lot different than having the stone tell you how to carve a pretty eye or a pretty hand or put things in the right place. It won't. You have to be able to do that on your own judgment, your own experience. You need to be able to understand what has to be done and then be determined enough to do it. Okay? So, but we'll break this off. And if you trust the process, you'd be amazed at how it turns out, because there's, you know, I mean, right now it looks like I'm nowhere near where it needs to be. I'm exactly where I need to be. It's just a lot of work, and you got to be patient, okay? So hang in there. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculptor Studio with a Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Thanks for coming in.